"Ladies and gentlemen, meet my daughter, a total waste of good genetics." That was the first thing my father said into the microphone. He pointed his glass of Chateau Margaux at me and smiled like a shark. "She crawls around in filth taking care of society's garbage instead of carrying on my legacy. A tragedy, really." 300 guests laughed. They thought it was a joke. They didn't know I had a wireless microphone hidden in my sleeve. And they definitely didn't know I was about to turn his $25 million gala into a federal crime scene. Before I tell you exactly how I destroyed his career 30 seconds later, let me know in the comments. Have you ever been humiliated by your own family? I want to know I'm not alone. I stepped out of the shadows. The sharp click of my heels on the marble floor cut through the lingering laughter like a knife. The room fell silent, the kind of silence that feels heavy and dangerous. I walked straight up the stairs to the stage. My father looked at me, his eyes narrowing, expecting a tantrum or a tearful plea for respect. He expected the daughter he had bullied for 2 decades. He didn't get her. I reached out and took the microphone from his hand. He was too stunned to stop me. I turned to the crowd, 300 faces waiting for the punchline. "My father is right about one thing," I said, my voice steady and cold. "I do work with the state's most vulnerable." But he left out my job title. I paused. I let the silence stretch until it was suffocating. "I am the senior program officer for the State Health Fund. And I am the sole signatory with veto power over the $25 million grant Dr. Marcus has been begging for since January." The room didn't just go quiet. It froze. The air was sucked out of the ballroom. My father's face went from flushed arrogance to ash gray in a single second. He dropped his glass. It shattered, red wine bleeding across the stage like a wound. I didn't look at the mess. I opened the thin black folder I had carried under my arm. "Let's talk about this proposal, shall we? A Center for Dignity Recovery. Sounds noble." I flipped a page. "But I did a line item audit this morning." I looked directly at the wealthy donors in the front row. 80% of the budget is allocated for facility upgrades. Specifically, imported Italian leather furniture for the executive offices and marble flooring for the private lobby. Not a single cent is allocated for patient beds. I flipped another page. The sound was like a gunshot in the silent room. Section 4. Administrative transport. $300,000 for 2 luxury SUVs. For a non-profit serving the homeless. I turned to my father. He was trembling. His mouth opened but no sound came out. He looked like a fish on a dock, gasping, realizing the water was gone. "This isn't a medical facility," I said into the microphone. "It's a retirement plan disguised as charity." I closed the folder with a snap. "Dr. Marcus, your application is formally rejected due to gross financial mismanagement and attempted fraud. You will never see a dime of state funding as long as I hold a pen." I dropped the microphone. It hit the floor with a heavy thud that echoed through the speakers. I turned and walked off the stage. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could feel the shock radiating off the crowd like heat. For 29 years I had been the invisible girl, the disappointment. But tonight, under the lights he paid for with money he didn't have, I was the only thing everyone could see. 10 years ago, in the mahogany library of his estate, my father held my acceptance letter to the state's top social work program. He didn't smile. He didn't congratulate me. He walked over to the fireplace, crumpled the paper in his fist and tossed it onto the logs. "You want to be a janitor for human refuse?" he had asked, dusting the ash off his hands. "Go ahead. But don't expect me to pay for you to ruin your life. You are dead to me the moment you walk out that door." He thought he had incinerated my future that night. He thought that by cutting me off, by refusing to speak my name for a decade, he had erased me. But fire doesn't just destroy things. It forges them. While he was building his empire of plastic surgery and vanity projects, I was working double shifts. I put myself through night school. I earned my master's in public administration while living on ramen and spite. I rose from a caseworker to a district manager and finally to the state board. He never knew. He never asked. To him, I was just a ghost, a failure he occasionally used as a punchline to make himself feel superior. That blindness was his fatal mistake. I looked down at him from the edge of the stage. He was gripping the podium, his knuckles white, staring at me like I was a stranger who had just broken into his house. He didn't recognize the woman standing in front of him. He only saw the girl he had thrown away. The truth is, I saw his grant application land on my digital desk 6 months ago. I saw the inflated numbers. I saw the shell companies listed as contractors. I could have rejected it then. I could have sent a quiet, professional email denying the funds. It would have been efficient. It would have been easy. But it wouldn't have been justice. If I had rejected him quietly, he would have spun a story. He would have blamed bureaucracy or politics or bad luck. He would have found another donor to charm, Another way to keep his house of cards standing. I needed to cut the head off the snake. So I waited. I approved the preliminary rounds. I let him believe he had already won. I watched him book the Grand Hotel. I watched him order the lobster and the vintage wine. I waited until he had gathered every important person in the city, every witness he needed to validate his ego. I let him build his own courtroom, hire his own jury, and pay for his own execution. You didn't just build a gala, Dad, I thought, looking into his terrified eyes. You built a trap. And you walked right into it. He thought my silence over the last 6 months was submission. He didn't realize it was the silence of a hunter waiting for the target to get comfortable. He wanted a show. I gave him one. I hope the lobster was worth it, I whispered, just loud enough for him to hear before I turned my back on him. The silence in the room was no longer heavy. It was electric. And for the first time in my life, the air didn't smell like his expensive cologne. It smelled like clean, cold justice. I pushed through the heavy service doors, leaving the murmurs of the ballroom behind. The air in the staff corridor was cold and smelled of industrial cleaner. I didn't run. I walked with the steady, measured pace of someone who had just finished a job. I just wanted to get to my car, to the silence, to the end of this long, ugly chapter. But monsters don't just die because you cut off their food supply. Sometimes they get hungry. I heard the door slam open behind me. It wasn't a normal entrance. It was a collision. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. The heavy, frantic breathing gave him away. You stop right there. His voice echoed off the concrete walls, stripped of all its public polish. It was raw, ugly, and wet with rage. I stopped. I turned slowly. Dr. Marcus stood 10 feet away. The impeccable tuxedo was rumpled. His face was a mottled map of red fury and sweat. The veins in his neck bulged against his collar. He didn't look like a brilliant surgeon anymore. He looked like a cornered animal. You think you can walk away? He lunged forward, closing the distance before I could step back. He grabbed my wrist. His fingers dug into my skin hard enough to bruise. You think you can come into my house in front of my peers and humiliate me? I looked down at his hand on my arm, then up at his eyes. I didn't pull away. I just stared at him with absolute clinical detachment. Let go, I said. Now. Or what? He hissed, leaning in close. I could smell the vintage wine on his breath, sour and stale. You'll write another report? You'll tell on me? You ungrateful, treacherous little brat. I gave you life. I put a roof over your head. And this is how you repay me? By destroying my reputation. And there was the truth, naked and ugly. I watched him unravel, and suddenly everything made sense. For years I thought he hated my career because it didn't make money. I thought he despised my choices because they weren't prestigious enough. But looking at the sheer panic in his eyes, I realized I had been wrong. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't even about the grant. It was about the hierarchy. In his mind, he was the sun and I was just a moon meant to reflect his light, or fade into the darkness. But tonight the moon had eclipsed the sun. The waste of genetics had exercised power over the genius. The babysitter had fired the surgeon. It was a narcissistic injury so deep it was fracturing his reality. He wasn't angry because he was broke. He was angry because I had proven I was stronger than him. He couldn't process a world where his victim was his judge. Your reputation? I asked, my voice calm, contrasting sharply with his hysteria. I didn't destroy your reputation, Dad. I just turned on the lights. If you don't like what people see, that's not my fault. You ruined everything. He shook my arm, spit flying from his lips. Do you know who I am? Do you know who I know? I will bury you. I will make one phone call and you will never work in this state again. I will sue you for defamation until you're begging on the streets with the junkies you love so much. He wasn't hearing me. He was doubling down, retreating into the only thing he had left. Threats. He thought he still held the cards. He thought he could bully reality back into a shape that pleased him. I wrenched my arm free with a sharp jerk. He stumbled back, surprised by the physical resistance. You're not listening, I said, stepping into his space, forcing him back against the wall. You think this is over? You think I just came here to embarrass you? He glared at me, panting, eyes darting around the empty hallway. You have no idea what you've done, he snarled. But I have an insurance policy. You think you're smart? You think you can take my money? I still have something you care about. A cold knot formed in my stomach. The rage in his eyes shifted into something sharper, something cruel. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. You want to play the villain, Chinmayi? Fine. Let's see how much you love your grandmother when she's sleeping on a park bench tonight. He smiled, then a wet, slick grin that made my skin crawl. He lowered the phone slowly, letting the threat hang in the air like smoke. He thought he had won. He thought he had found the one button he could press to make me heal. "You see," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You have your little title, Chinmayi. You have your clipboard and your self-righteousness. But I have the one thing that actually matters in this world." He stepped back, spreading his arms wide to gesture at the opulent hallway, at the memory of the ballroom behind us, at the ghost of the party he had thrown. "I have resources. I have power. You think rejecting one grant stops me? I have a black fund, darling. A rainy day reserve that you and your little bureaucrats can't touch." He laughed, and it was a jagged, ugly sound. He walked over to a service cart that had been abandoned in the hallway, grabbing a half-empty bottle of the Chateau Margaux. He poured a splash into a water glass and swirled it. "Look at this wine. $2,000 a bottle. Look at the lobster tails on the buffet. Do you know who paid for all of this? The foundation. My foundation. I can write off a $100,000 party as donor cultivation. I can fly to Paris on research trips. I live in a world where the rules are suggestions and money is the only law. You can't hurt me. I am the institution." He took a sip of the wine, his eyes locked on mine, daring me to challenge him. I didn't blink. I didn't flinch. I just reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone again. I tapped the screen 3 times and turned it around so he could see. It wasn't a recording. It was a photo. A high-resolution image of the gala's catering invoice, the wine list and the consulting fees, paid to a shell company registered in his name. "You're right, Dad," I said, my voice cutting through his arrogance like a scalpel. "You are the institution. And that is exactly why you're going to prison." He frowned, the glass halting halfway to his mouth. "What are you babbling about?" "It's called self-dealing," I said. "And under IRS Code 4941, it is strictly prohibited for a private foundation manager to use charitable assets for personal benefit. No luxury dinners. No vintage wine. And certainly no donor cultivation parties that function as ego-stroking for the chairman." I swiped to the next photo, a screenshot of the federal statute. "You just admitted, boasted actually, that you used foundation money to pay for this night. That isn't a loophole, Dad. That's tax fraud. It's embezzlement. And when you combine it with the inflated construction contracts I found in your grant proposal, it's a RICO case." The color drained from his face so fast it looked like the blood had simply evaporated. He lowered the glass, his hand shaking so hard the wine sloshed over the rim, staining his white cuff red. "I took photos of the menu," I continued, relentless. "I took photos of the wine bottles. I have the invoices. And 30 seconds ago, while you were bragging about your black fund, I uploaded all of it to a secure server shared with the IRS Criminal Investigation Division." "You wouldn't," he stammered. "I already did. This isn't a party anymore, Dad. It's a crime scene. And you just gave me the confession." He stared at the phone like it was a weapon. The swagger vanished. The king of surgery was gone. All that remained was a greedy old man terrified of consequences. "You traitor," he whispered. "No. You committed the crime." I just turned on the lights. Panic twisted into rage. Instead of surrendering, he grabbed his own phone and hovered over a contact. "Delete the photos," he snarled. "Or I stop paying for your grandmother's nursing home. Tonight. They'll roll her bed onto the street." He flashed the screen. Shady Pines. I didn't flinch. "Call them," I said. "Speakerphone." He dialed. The line was disconnected. "She's not there," I told him. "I moved her last Tuesday. The Kensington. 1 year paid up front." His face collapsed. The story he'd invented about me, broke, naive beneath him, disintegrated. "You never saw me," I said. "You were too busy admiring your own reflection. I earned my degrees, managed budgets bigger than your hospital, and saved half my salary for 5 years. You assumed I was weak because I refused to worship you." He slid to the floor. "Please," he begged. "I have money hidden." I turned the screen to him. It showed an active call. "Call in progress. Special Agent Miller, Barra's criminal investigation." "He's been listening the last 3 minutes," I said. The phone dropped from his hand. The fight was over. I walked out through the service hallway as federal agents closed in. Behind me came shouting, then sirens, Then the small, panicked voice of a man who finally understood gravity. Outside the air smelled like rain. I got into my modest car and dialed my grandmother. "It's done," I said. "And him," she whispered. "He can't hurt us anymore." For the first time in my life, the noise in my head, his voice, was gone. Not joy exactly. More like the ache after cutting out a tumor. As I drove away, I didn't look back. People like him think power makes them untouchable. But truth always lands eventually. If someone is treating you like you're invisible, let them. Ghosts walk through walls. Ghosts see everything. And by the time they notice you, the checkmate is already set. Sometimes being overlooked is your greatest advantage.